Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Comic Anthologist. And if you haven't done so already, please hit that like button. And also, if you haven't, subscribe to us. So today we're going to talk about issue 2 of
X-Men Days of Future Past Doomsday.
Right, and it's still got a whole lot more layers coming to it right now. That's all I got to say because that's an excellent read. I can't wait for the third one to come out.
Exactly, because this issue dealt with the coming of the character known as Ahab, which is a mutant hunter from the future. And he, when he made his debut back in, he was a time traveler.
And that was what, Days of Future Present?
Yeah.
Right.
And so, and he came in around that time of Days of Future Past. But the thing was, his definitive origin was in the pages of Excalibur that came out, the first volume 1 of Excalibur that came out years ago.
Right.
And so, but getting to the main crux of the story, man, those guys, especially Henry Peter Gyrick, man.
I mean, he just literally just started taking away the rights of these mutants and just like, whatever, it's in the Constitution. Like, I don't care, we're still gonna treat you two ways. You're a criminal by birth, and also because you have powers, you're a weapon of mass destruction. So therefore, we have to treat you as such and have to basically turn them into second-rate citizens or eliminate you one or the other.
Or
extermination.
Basically. And so, even when the X-Men didn't commit any kind of crimes or anything, all they were doing was trying to protect themselves, especially fighting the Sentinels. They slaughtered and killed Professor X.
They killed Iceman. They took out Nightcrawler. They took out
his girlfriend and
Ayanna Rasputin.
Yeah, exactly. They killed that Colossus' sister. I was just like, man, and they weren't doing anything at the time. They were basically being tracked by the government. So to put them in a place where they were the most vulnerable and had them killed.
But you know what killed me was the part where those soldiers went and attacked the Xavier Institute. And even Professor Xavier straight up was like, listen, we surrendered.
We're not doing anything, we're not provoking anyone, or we're not doing anything wrong.
And the soldier named Nuke, he was like, well, you know, it's obvious what we have to do now. Basically go in there and slaughter folks. And that's what they did. They wiped out the entire crew of the New Mutants, but they took one hostage, which will lead up into issue 3. But in the meantime, they tried to have some modicum of happiness towards the end of the story, but that was like the last happy day that they were going to have, because it was still leading to the darker times of the Days of Future Past, which was about to come to pass.
Yeah, because the issues that were written, 141 and 142, and I don't know if we touched on that on the first.
We barely touched on that on the last.
And that was written by
John. It was written.
The artwork was by John Byrne,
and it was Chris Claremont.
Chris Claremont.
Yes.
And so, when I went back and read some of the older issues that led up to that, it's like you had the X-Men in the present day, and all of a sudden it jumped to the future, and I was just like, whoa.
Well, that's what this one was doing too.
Yeah,
it was jumping between time points.
But see, the whole point I liked about it is that it jumped to this dystopian future, and just like basically you're in the middle of it now, deal with it.
Right.
But it's interesting to see how everything is playing out, how the X-Men are little by little getting slaughtered and getting taken off the board. By the time we get to the issue 140, technically the issue 141, where part 1 of Days of Future Past, most of them are gone. Most of them are dead.
Yeah, because it's already further into the future. What was it, 2015 at that point? I mean, they went 30 years into the future.
Right.
So I think it was 2010 or 2015. One of the two that they had introduced in 141, 142 back in 1980.
Yeah.
So going forward, this time around, they just, in terms of showing how things turned out, everything quickly escalated to the point where,
all because of certain government officials.
and not only that, the President William Stryker.
He's been a main villain of the Wolverine movies, and the X movies. Let's just be real, that he's one of the major villains.
Well, yeah, of course, because he basically slaughters and experiments on mutants. He made his first appearance in the New Mutants graphic novel called
God Loves, Man Kills.
And that's when he made his first appearance.
But you know what his reasoning was to kill all mutants?
What was that?
His son was born as a mutant, and he couldn't handle that. So he killed his son and his wife. And so because he felt that because in the book he was a preacher, so he kind of felt that God had betrayed him by giving him a mutant son.
Man, that changed the whole dynamic of the way how people see him in the movies, because he's a military man in all the X-Men films that he was showcased in.
Right, but in the book,
He was a religious person thinking that it was a curse to have mutant powers. And in fact, we see a lot of that today. But in terms of not only mirroring what's happening in today's times with politics and things of that nature, but getting back to the main point.
Well, you don't have to get back to the main point, because remember how we mentioned a few minutes ago about how they were taking away the rights of mutants and stuff like that?
Right.
What do you think they're doing now?
Yeah.
So, what do you think they're doing now, or trying to do little by little? So
Yeah.
these books that we've been reading is kind of a metaphor of what we're dealing with in real life.
No, actually, it's a mirror of what's happening in real life.
A mirror and a metaphor.
Right, because the mirror, in terms of what's happening back in the comics, is basically taking the rights away from mutants.
And then putting them in concentration camps.
And not only that, they're going to go after superheroes too as well.
Yeah, because quiet as kept. They didn't want the superheroes to have they are afraid of them having that power set as well. But one of the parts that was one of the golden parts in that book of #2 that I liked was General Ross.
Oh yes.
Whenever because he's the general that's known as hunting down the Hulk because of being in the military and everything, and he believed that the Hulk was the cause of a lot of his problems over time.
Of course.
But what I liked about him was that the government officials that were ahead of him, or those politicians that were issuing him the orders, he thought they were morally wrong, coming from, ironically, from somebody that also went after a superpower being, which being the Hulk. And so when they
presented with the case of having to hunt down mutants, he's like, nope. He says I politely
because he knew that
he knew constitutionally it was wrong.
Yeah,
they were sitting up there just doing away parts of the Constitution for their own convenience in order to hunt down another section of the human race, which is the mutants. And that to me was just straight arbitrarily wrong.
Yeah, but they didn't care about that.
Of course.
That's the problem. It's like once they get a modicum of power, they feel like they could take the ball and run with it and act like they could do anything. They act like they're gods.
And again, that's happening in today's society. There's certain things that's mirroring what we read in the comic books. Because the way how these things are written, it's also a mirror to a degree, because as an artist, you see the things in the world around you and you interpret it as such, but applying it to a Marvel comic, which has always been ahead of the game.
And that's why you said a mirror, but I said metaphorically, because us being artists as well, we take what we see or what we live through and we change it metaphorically to symbolize whatever we symbolize it in the artwork is what we see in real life.
Right, and the mirror of what's going on in real life versus what's happening in the artwork also basically tells a tale of the times of what we are living in right here and now.
Absolutely.
This time and place.
Yep, exactly.
That's the way how I've always seen it. And Marvel and the X-Men, especially the X-Men comic books, have always been ahead of the curve in terms of telling what's been going on. Because back in the day, again, Marvel had created Professor X and Magneto. Professor X represented Martin Luther King. Magneto represented Malcolm X. Both of them trying to achieve the same goal, but have radical ways of how to go about taking care of those goals.
And before we wrap up, I want to get back to Ahab.
Right.
Ahab, he comes to the fore briefly in issue 2, where he's being interviewed by Peter Gyrick, and what happens is Gyrick sees through his BS regarding like, what's your motivation for joining us to this or that, and basically there was a mutant that was in the pages of Excalibur named Spore when he was interrogating him. And what happened was he was in a room where should that mutant display any kind of aggressive tendencies, or the therapist, because Rory Calhoun, aka Ahab, was a therapist, and Spore basically instigated him into attacking him, which the room was basically set up to react accordingly. And what happened was Spore manipulated him to attack him, and then the room came alive and basically shot out weapons or lasers and literally cut off Rory's leg. And then what happened was Gyrick saw through his BS about why he wanted to join the government to hunt
But
down
you
the
know the
mutants.
thing that killed me,
He gave him that name,
the
Ahab.
Ahab,
Yeah.
right? Because he kept talking about his white whale.
Yeah.
He kept talking about the story of Moby Dick,
Mm-hmm.
and all of anybody that's out there who has read Moby Dick,
Mm-hmm.
Ahab is the man who basically went and hunted that whale until it killed him, trying to hunt it to the ends of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, he gave him that name. He says, "No, you have your Ahab. That's what the mutants are to you now. You are Ahab. They are your white whale. What are you going to do about it?"
Right. And basically, Henry Gyrick basically manipulated him into even further
yeah.
acts of
He goaded him.
wanton destruction.
Of course, because then you see in the last final pages before the wedding.
Just like you said before, when they blew up the mansion, Ahab had taken a prisoner.
Right.
You know who that was, right?
Of course they do. It was Cyclops' only daughter.
Yeah, Rachel Summers
And that was the daughter of Cyclops and Scott Summers
and Phoenix
and
at the time.
Phoenix at the time. It wasn't Jean. It was Jean Grey,
But
it
she was Phoenix.
Phoenix
And
at
the
the
thing
time.
was, no Phoenix Saga or the Dark Phoenix Saga had never taken place either. So Rachel was born with this Phoenix powers that will eventually manifest within her too later
Eventually.
on down the line.
Right.
But in issue 3, we'll find out what her fate is once Ahab gets his hands on her. So yeah, I'm very curious, and I'm very much looking forward to issue 3.
Yep. And we will definitely tune in on the next note
Mm-hmm.
in terms of discussing issue 3 of X-Men Days of Future Past Doomsday, because it's about to go down. Any case, if you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button, and thank you for tuning in. And if you haven't already, also hit that like button. And until then, stay safe and take it easy. Peace.